On 29 November 2023, a CV-22B for the Air Force crashed. On 29 November 2023, an Air Force CV-22 Bravo crashed off the coast of Japan, resulting in the loss of 8 crew members. It's a reminder of how dangerous aviation can be, and it's the first AIB I've covered recently that resulted in the loss of life. So we're going to take a look at what the board found as the primary cause and then contributing causes for this mishap. Just to remember that this is the AIB. So when a mishap happens, there are 2 boards: the Safety Investigation Board, which is safety privileged information that goes to the squadrons and has a little bit more detail so that other squadrons and other pilots can learn from it. And then the AIB, which is public, which assigns blame or fault. So that's how this is written. Obviously, we don't want to disparage the dead. And I always talk about, but for the grace of God, go I. The error chains like this can happen to anybody at any time. It's just a matter of, does the proverbial Swiss cheese line up? All right, so this is the AIB Accident Investigation Board report from the 21st Special Operations Squadron, 353rd Special Operations Wing, Yokota Air Base, Japan. It happened on 29 November 2023. Brigadier General Michael Conley. On 29 November 2023 at approximately 14:40 local time, that's 2:40 in the afternoon. Mishap aircraft, a CV-22, so we'll call it the mishap aircraft moving forward. Tail number 10-0054. I've talked about this before. That the 10 is 2010, is when the aircraft was funded for production, essentially. So it's probably a 2010 model, especially early like that, although it could be late 2009. Impacted the water approximately 1/2 mile off the coast of Yakushima Island, Japan, while participating in a joint interoperability exercise. The mishap aircraft was operated by the 21st Special Operations Squadron, 353rd Special Operations Wing, Yokota Air Base, Japan. The 8-member mishap crew included 5 CV-22B crew members from the 21st Special Operations Squadron, 1 direct support operator from the 43rd Intelligence Squadron, Det 1, and 2 medical personnel from the 1st Special Operations Squadron, Kadena. Mishap aircraft was destroyed and all crew members sustained fatal injuries upon impact. The remains of 7 were found, but the 8th still has not been located, even after a 43-day multinational search. So the mishap crew aborted their planned mission after multiple advisories and a caution displayed in the mishap aircraft cockpit indicating a land as soon as possible conditions. They're going to talk about this here, but just to explain real quick, in an Air Force -1, which is our operating manual, and how we're trained from pilot training on, there are 2 scenarios with an emergency: land as soon as practical and land as soon as possible. These are ones that obviously you can't just reset and keep going about your mission. So if it's something that is a problem that you have to return to base, there are 2 levels of urgency. Land as soon as practical, you're looking for a suitable airfield. Doesn't have to necessarily be first available. It just means that you have to abort the mission, plan to eventually land somewhere suitable. Land as soon as possible basically means you're taking the first piece of concrete or in a helicopter. Sometimes it means you're going to find a field and land. So it is an urgent matter. And if you don't land as soon as you possibly can, bad things are going to happen. So practical, less urgent, possible, get on the ground now. And I'm simplifying this, but trying to break this down so it's easily understandable. So in this case, they had a land as soon as possible condition, which is get it on the ground. The mishap crew diverted towards Yakushima Airport, RJFC, located approximately 60 miles east of the mishap aircraft's position. While on final at the runway at approximately 800 feet above ground level, mishap aircraft experienced a sudden material failure that put the mishap aircraft into an immediate left roll, resulting in the aircraft rolling twice and impacting the water. So it did 2 rolls, which is horrific. It's absolutely, you think about the pilots and the crew, and it is a horrific visualization. The board president found by preponderance of the evidence the mishap was caused by a catastrophic failure of the left-hand prop rotor gearbox that created a rapidly cascading failure of the aircraft's drive system, resulting in an instantaneous asymmetric lift condition that was unrecoverable by the crew. The board president further found by the preponderance of the evidence mishap pilot's decisions were causal, as they prolonged the mishap sequence and removed any consideration of an earlier landing at a different divert location. In addition, the board president found by preponderance of the evidence the following factors substantially contributed to the mishap: inadequate risk management, ineffective crew resource management. These factors, when considered together, substantially contributed to an insufficient sense of urgency throughout the entire mishap sequence, beginning with the first prop rotor gearbox cockpit advisory approximately 49 minutes prior to impact. So this is a summary. This is the big picture on what happened. So now that we've done the executive summary, we'll take a look at the more specific aspects of this mishap. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the CV-22, it has two modes, helicopter mode and airplane mode, as seen here. And IOC, initial operational capability, was achieved in 2009 after the first one was delivered in 2007. So it's been around for a little while. Primary function is for special operations forces to have long-range insertion and extraction and resupply capability. So this is the big thing we're going to talk about today. Prop rotor gearbox drive system overview. Has two prop rotor gearboxes, one mounted on each nacelle. It transmits power and provides speed reduction from the engine to the prop rotors. So that is what it looks like. Your engine input there. You've got gears. The gears run more gears with a low-speed planetary assembly and a high-speed planetary assembly, which is the mast, which spins the big spinny things. So there you go. Here are the high-speed sun gear mesh with the high-speed planet pinions. Has a chip detection system that provides a visual indication if it detects ferromagnetic debris in the gear oil. It has the capability to burn off debris through electrodes. So the visual advisory is a PRGB chip burn. When it does that, chips and or debris have been detected and associated PRGB and burned off. If you get three consecutive, then it's a land as soon as practical situation. If you get chips, as an auditory and visual CDU, anytime a chip fails to burn off, three consecutive chip burn attempts. And then if that happens, it's unburnable. So it's got chips in the oil, and now it's land as soon as possible. And if there are abnormal secondary indications, then it's land immediately. So here's the definitions that we talked about: practical, possible, and immediately. So the actual definition: practical extended flight is not recommended. Landing and sight duration is at the discretion of the pilot in command. If any condition exists with NATOP's directed landing criteria, before deciding whether to continue the mission, aircrew should consider factors such as threat, remote location, repair capability, practicality of maintenance, recovery team to launch, remaining aircraft system redundancy, and mutual support, other relevant factors. So it's not get on the ground. Land as soon as possible, however, nearest available area in which a safe landing can be made. If it's over water, determination of landing as soon as possible is at the discretion of the pilot flying. You got to look at sea state, weather, communication, survival equipment. In either case, you should be flying to get on the ground as soon as you can. Land immediately is without delay, and any continued flight is extremely hazardous. If over water, you're ditching. So control ditching procedures, prepare the aircraft for a water landing. So this means this thing can't fly anymore. If you don't control the landing, it's going to be an uncontrolled crash land. So the sequence of events, they were doing an Indo-PACOM authorized exercise, integrate special operations forces under the command of SOCPAC. They did joint mission planning. The mishap pilot was the lead planner for air integration of all participants. So the mishap pilot was the aircraft commander and the airborne mission commander, responsible for command of his own aircraft as well as command of the other airborne participants in the exercise. So mission commander is a separate upgrade that typically any major weapon system will do later in their progression. So first you worry about formations and 2 to 4 ships, and then mission commanders are looking at packages like multi-plane engagements. So there were 2 CV-22 Bravo aircraft participating in the air exercise. It was Gundam 2-1 and Gundam 2-2. Gundam 22 was the mishap aircraft. Gundam 23 was non-participating flying spare aircraft, postured to swap with one of the primary crews or provide maintenance support if required. So basically a hot spare. Gundam 21 had a crew of 5, including an additional pilot and a 10-person soft team on board to conduct a military free-fall water jump. Mishap aircraft had an 8-person crew. The mishap pilot was on board as a relief pilot for the last leg of the flight between Kadena and Yokota. The MDSO was on board to provide in-flight intelligence support. Medics were on board for medical coverage. Plan was to take off at 11 o'clock from Yokota, conduct tilt rotor air-to-air refueling with a KC-130J, proceed south over water between mainland Japan and Okinawa, Japan for exercise integration. During the planned 3-hour overwater portion, they would drop the MFF jumpers while the mishap aircraft provided medical coverage. After the aircraft exercise was complete, they would land at Kadena to refuel and swap out aircraft commanders for the flight back. Planning was standard. They did a risk assessment. The top 4 risks, they said, were higher headquarters mission complexity. Anytime you're doing multinational, multi-force engagements, that's a thing. Non-proficient in airdrop, so they haven't done that in a while. So it was kind of we're just not proficient in it. Greater than 12-hour crew day, so fatigue could be an issue, and pressure. They also identified mitigation, thorough concept of operations, so understanding what they were doing, multiple training events prior to the mission, so they were trying to get spun up for it, planned crew change for last 4 hours of the mission so that they would be fresh for the fatigue, and large en route times prior to and mission events. I don't know how, I guess that's time that you can prepare and kind of get your mind right between events. 3 aircraft commanders signed the worksheet with an overall risk assessment of medium. The DO authorized it. Director of Operation concurred. However, he assessed the mission to be lower in risk and approved by signing the worksheet as low medium for the overall risk. So prior to the event, the mishap pilot, acting as the mission commander, deliberately decided to have the formation take off 30 minutes earlier than originally planned due to headwinds, because that was going to increase your flight time and fuel burn rate. Additionally, they added a refueling stop at Iwakuni to reduce mission risk in the event that they were unable to do the air refueling. So the flight lead, G21, departure was delayed due to radio communication equipment error with their soft team. The formation lead cleared the mishap aircraft to take off ahead of them as a single ship under instrument flight rules. During takeoff, the mishap aircraft experienced the first emergency procedure of the sortie. This was Mission Computer 1 flight. This occurs due to a software glitch when the backup computer automatically takes over while the primary does a reset or restart, referred to as a warm start. This EP was displayed visually on the CDU, audibly with a master caution, necessitated to complete a 29-step checklist while flying to Iwakuni, which was completed without issue. So there's the first leg there, 60 or 70 knot headwind out of the west at their cruise altitude of 10,000 feet. They flew a visual to runway 20, and they touched down 12:31 local time. Their flight lead showed up 10 minutes later to rejoin with them. After ground ops, they exited the runway at taxiway Foxtrot. They got a second mission computer warm start. The mishap co-pilot verbally acknowledged the warm start alert and continued via taxiway Foxtrot 2 to the hot pits, an area for refueling without shutting down. So hot pit, you don't shut down, or you only shut down one engine, so you don't have to do a through flight inspection. They refuel it while you're running, and then you go. They monitored the fuel flow while started to talk about the KC-130Js for their refueling. They ran the checklist for the second warm start while refueling. There was yet a third warm start, which caused the intelligence broadcast receiver connection to drop, a system required for the mishap co-pilot to receive, for the mishap crew to receive intelligence. During the time on the ground at Iwakuni, and while the mishap pilot was coordinating mission events with other participants, the aircraft experienced multiple system advisory, mostly associated with the warm start, including blade fold control unit periodic built-in test failure, a GPS receiver failure, an exhaust deflector fail, radio frequency jammer failure, and infrared jammer failure. It was also nearly overfilled a feed tank due to a ground defuel refuel panel fail. Some of these additional failures were associated with mission computer fault. They require additional crew attention. As the mishap crew worked all these issues over a busy intercom system, there was an abundance of radio traffic on the air traffic control frequency. Once both aircraft were refueled, the formation taxied via taxiway Foxtrot toward the runway. So you can already kind of see I know we some people don't like when we talk about it, but it really is the Swiss cheese model starting to line up, right? You've got an aircraft that has had failures in an unrelated system, but it is failures with a 29-step checklist. It's failures with a lot of nuisance master cautions that are associated with that. So as the system resets, you start getting these little cautions, advisories, stuff like that, which happens often. It's not uncommon for that, because the checklist will say, if this is caused by this, then you don't have to run the subsequent checklist. So, but they're busy trying to work the problem. They're busy trying to think about the air refueling that they're about to do and the exercise that they're trying to do. The pilot in command, the aircraft commander, is the mission commander for this. So he's thinking about that. So it's high stress, a lot going on, and it's starting to build this error chain that I think is going to be a factor later on. So they took off from taxiway Alpha southbound at 109 via 75-degree nacelle short takeoff. So it's kind of like, I guess it's a hybrid between vertical and not. After takeoff by the formation, the Flying Spear aircraft, Gundam 23 and its crew, was 1 hour in trail. The formation climbed to a cruise altitude of 8,000 feet, and then they began troubleshooting one of the other issues. Approximately 40 minutes after takeoff and in the vicinity of Miyazaki Airport, the MC received a left-hand prop rotor gearbox chip burn emergency advisory on the CDU with no associated tone. So remember, we talked about it. If it gives you a chip burn, it's advisory. It's telling you, hey, I'm working through burn-in. I've detected a chip in the oil that could be a problem, but it's going to try to burn this off. So that's, at this point, it's not an emergency. It's just advisory, like, hey, heads up, things aren't going great right now, but they're not catastrophic yet. They appropriately acknowledged, cleared the advisory on the CDU. 23 seconds later, a second left-hand prop rotor gearbox chip burn advisory posted was again acknowledged. So this is another, hey, still trying to burn off these chips. During the 3 months following the second chip burn advisory, the mishap pilot continued coordination with other exercise participants on new flight routing for having any discussion about the advisories. So you have to understand, when you're the mission commander, you're busy. I've done this single seat, and it's tough because you're on other radios. You're trying to make sure everybody's in the right spot, and you're responsible for the overall mission execution of multiple formations. So you're coordinating, making sure they're checking in on time, making sure everybody is where they're supposed to be so that you continue, or you have to flex to your contingency plan. So that's where this pilot's mindset was at this point. He's not even thinking about it. He's like, more than likely, this was a scenario of, I see the advisory, but it's just an advisory. I'm not worried about it yet. It could be something that happened often, or he's happened previously in their career, and it just wasn't something that immediately said, hey, I need to think about this because I'm worried about getting through this exercise. The new flight routing took the formation westward from their brief route to facilitate the AAR timing. So that's exactly what the mishap pilot's worried about, is coordinating these things, not necessarily this chip burn advisory right now. Mishap pilot then verbally acknowledged the left-hand prop rotor gearbox chip burn advisory and checked the maintenance flight summary page to verify that 2 chip burns had occurred. Remember, we talked about that? So it's telling you it burned the chips. Nothing to worry about yet. It's working as intended. Flight engineer reviewed the prop rotor gearbox chip checklist and briefed the mishap crew on the progression of a chip burn. Mishap pilot acknowledged the information and queried the mishap crew on whether anyone had ever experienced a chip burn in the aircraft. Only the mishap pilot and the ATS attested to having seen an actual chip burn advisory. Mishap co-pilot inquired on the status of current landing criteria, and the mishap pilot said they had not yet met landing criteria. They informed the mishap crew that they would continue to monitor and review checklists and proceed verbally review checklists for the secondary indications listed for the prop rotor gearbox chips. They then continued to discuss troubleshooting the IBR. So 2 things are going on right now. They're worried about another system that was caused by the mission computer resets, but they've never seen the chip burn except for one of them. And they know it's not a land as soon as practical, land as soon as possible condition. So they're not necessarily thinking land, but the co-pilot brings it up and like, hey, is this something we're going to need to divert for? And he's like, well, we haven't met that criteria yet. And then the engineer goes, okay, copy that, but I'm going to start looking at the subsequent checklist because I know that this could lead to this. So I'm going to start looking at the advanced checklist just in case this gets worse. So I'm ready. And then I'll have a plan. So far they're doing everything right. You can't fault the mishap pilot for his head being out of the cockpit because that's why there's a crew. That's why you have the engineer going, I'm worried about the system. I'm going to do the system stuff. The co-pilot's worried about, fly the airplane. And then the mishap pilot, the aircraft commander's looking outside the airplane, thinking about what's next. Mishap co-pilot suggested the mishap pilot use the line of sight tool on the nearest divert airfield. It draws a line between the aircraft symbol and the designated position and real-time range to the divert. Mishap pilot declined the suggestion, elected to use ForeFlight on his EFB, which is a iPad. He's got a little iPad that's got that, which provides an automatic relative position to the nearest airport. Filters can be set with a minimum runway length. They use 4,000. The mishap crew did not change ForeFlight settings and more detailed aviation charts or changing chart scales and multifunction display to search for other options. So what they're saying is they could have used the aircraft systems and he may not have wanted to because he wanted to keep it for the mission that they were doing, but he still had his electronic flight bag, his iPad, that he's like, okay, well, I'm going to look for the nearest one on here because I don't want to mess with the systems here. So as the formation approached the southern tip of mainland Japan, 12 minutes after the second ship burn advisory, the engineer announced a third ship burn advisory and the mishap pilot verbally acknowledged. The engineer then notified the mishap crew that per the guidance, they were now in a land as soon as practical criteria and confirmed there were no secondary indications. Remember, we talked about multiple ship burns. Now it gets worse. The system's allowed to do it X number of times. Once it exceeds that threshold, now it's an emergency situation. They went to land as soon as practical, which is suitable divert airfield. Mishap pilot marked the time for the third ship burn advisory and told the mishap crew to monitor times to see if the frequency increased and to continue monitoring for secondary indications. The mishap crew discussed that eventually the nearest airfield would be Okinawa, but at the moment, the mishap aircraft was still 300 miles from Okinawa, all over open water. So it's not a great situation. You're blue water ops essentially in this thing. So, where are you going to divert is always something in your mind. They did not discuss the actual nearest airfield, Kanoya Air Base, which was approximately 10 miles behind their current position. The mishap pilot called Gundam 21 on the interflight frequency to communicate that they had 3 PRGB chip burn advisories, but planned to continue the mission. During the radio transmission, 5 minutes after the third left-hand PRGB chip burn advisory, a fourth burn advisory posted, and then the IBR, which is what they need for critical information, was receiving information, but aircraft mission systems were still not operational. So the engineer left his seat to assist the MATs in troubleshooting the IBR connection. So we get a fourth one. We told our flight lead, hey, I'm working this issue. And then the IBR starts kind of working, but there's something else going on with it. So the flight engineer is now distracted doing mission stuff because the mishap pilot has prioritized, we are going to continue the mission. We're so far away from what he believes is a suitable divert. I think they were just looking ahead. I think they were at this point, they're just looking forward and kind of forgot, because sometimes you just get focused on, what's in front of you and you forget about the 360. So they're thinking about the mission. They're thinking about, well, there's no associated indications because it could be a nuisance. It could be something that is not valid. It could be this detector is going bad. So, there's a lot of things you start to think about when this happens. The right answer at this point would have been to turn around and go to the place 10 miles behind them. But there's still like a lot of external factors that are making this a human factors thing versus just the aircraft having a bad day. So there's your chip burns 1 and 2, and then 3. So right now they've got at least 2 diverts, maybe 3, maybe 4 as it's happening. At this point, They've got a military airfield 10 miles behind them, and then civilian airfields a little bit farther than that. So after the 4th, they checked the alternate electronic rendezvous equipment on the KC-130J, rectified the IBR connection, discussed time associated from their location to Kadena, discussed experience with chip burns and chips. So they're talking about it, and that's common. You know, you're like, hey, have you seen this before? No, I haven't seen this. Yes, I have. Last time it was a nuisance. And that's where you start to get in a little bit of confirmation bias, because if you've seen it and it was nothing, you're going to say, well, it's nothing. Or if you've heard, hey, this is a nuisance, there's no associated other indications, I'm not worried about it. So most conservative thing at this point would be turn around, but the lean forward in your straps, get mission done is we're going to press as far as we can. And then if it becomes a factor, we're going to turn around. But what complicates things is the blue water ops. And I say blue water, it's blue water for them. It's not really blue water ops. So 10 minutes after the 4th chip burn advisory, a 5th chip burn advisory posted. And then the flight engineer climbed back into a seat. 3 minutes after that, the left prop rotor gearbox chips caution posted along with a master caution tone. So this is I've tried to burn it off, and now you've got chips in the system. This is the bad one. Mishap pilot verified with the engineer that they were now dealing with a land as soon as possible criteria, and then radioed flight lead, we've got chips. Mishap pilot then passed the aircraft controls to the co-pilot, directed a turn to a heading of 111, so east, towards Yakushima, their closest planned divert field. The engineer referenced the PRG chips checklist, scanned for secondary indications, and then asked for the radio frequency for Yakushima Airport. Mishap co-pilot verbalized they had 11 minutes until they would arrive overhead the airport, and stated he would continue to fly the aircraft while the Mishap pilot made the applicable radio calls over the interplane radio, so interflight. The flight lead asked if they wanted mutual support. The Mishap pilot directed them to continue with the mission. So flight of 2, they're dropping off the soft guys. 2 is just the medics and the support. They say, hey, you want us to go with you while you divert? We can provide mutual support. He says, no, mission's more important. So this pilot's mentality is the mission. They want to get this done. And we've talked about it in pre-flight. It starts from the step desk. They have thought about the priority and the pressure. So he's like, nope, you go ahead, make this happen. Because he didn't want to take him out of the fight. So at this point, the Mishap pilot radioed the deputy mission commander, which you always have an alternate, and transferred mission command responsibilities. To this point, this Mishap pilot is still thinking mission. We've got to have the alternate take over because you have to run this show. The mission's still going to go on. We're just dealing with this. Don't worry about us. We've got it. And then they called Dash 3, directing the maintenance team be flown to meet them at Yakushima Airport. So now the maintenance team is like, hey, we got to get this thing flying right. Bring the maintenance team. Let's see if we can get this thing flying again and still continue the mission. So again, mission. At this time, closer divert possibilities existed, including a vertical landing option at Kuroshima and a roll-on landing option at Satsuma Iojima Airport, which is represented in figure 11. 4 minutes after the chips caution posted, without further discussion of divert option, the Mishap crew began a gradual descent to 1,000 feet to set up the Mishap aircraft for entry into aircraft traffic pattern at Yakushima Airport. And here is what it looks like. Chip burn 4, chip burn 5. Now they get it. Now they're diverting. This would have been 9 minutes. So had they gone here, and then this would have been 4 minutes, but it had to be a helipad. So I mean, a runway is probably better, but this, especially, if you're talking chip stuff, but I don't know CV-22 procedures. To me, of the 3, this probably seems the best. This is probably the second best, and this is okay. I just need to get on the ground in 4 minutes. Yakushima Airport does not have an operating control tower and receives aerodrome flight information services remotely from Kagoshima Airport. ATC operations officers provide AFIS support to support operations, but do not provide pilots with takeoff and landing clearance. That's an untowered field. No big deal. As they approached Yakushima, the Mishap pilot made a transmission on the radio that they were inbound, but received no response. So, yeah, you're just talking in the blind there. As they got closer, they heard radio traffic on the frequency indicating an aircraft was taxiing to take off on runway 32. On initial contact with the Yakushima radio, they requested to land on 32. The airport's OPSO asked if they were in an emergency situation. Mishap pilot responded affirm. Of note, this was the first time in the Mishap sequence that the term emergency was used in either any of the external radio calls. So ICAO procedures, military, we like to just call it an emergency. ICAO, though, you'd get the mayday, 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 or the pan, and let everybody know you're in an emergency situation. In this case, this is the first time they said they were an emergency. Although the Mishap crew could not audibly discern the radio call to hold, Mishap pilot directed the MCP to hold near the approach end of runway 32 for departing traffic. Mishap aircraft then posted a chip detector fail advisory on the CDU, indicating a chip detector failure had occurred. So the failure is now with the chip detector itself. Mishap pilot commented that he was no longer worried since he assumed the previous warnings were errors due to a faulty chip detector. Remember I talked about sometimes you get that confirmation bias. You start thinking of, well, what have I heard elsewhere? What have I seen elsewhere? And a chip detector, once or twice, it's the boy who cried wolf. If it's a few, you're like, okay, there's a problem. But then if it becomes such a nuisance that the thing fails, you're like, man, because sensors fail. Detectors fail. So now he's probably like, okay, it was just a nuisance warning. The Mishap pilot next directed the co-pilot to do one more big right-hand loop and come in and just set up for landing. So he's like, look, we got traffic out there. We're just going to do a big right-hand loop and then we'll set up for a normal landing. The flight engineer, however, verbally reminded the crew that the left prop rotor gearbox chips advisory was still posted, and then the Mishap pilot acknowledged. So the engineers in the back going, hey, boss, I know it's failed, but that thing is still there. We still need to be worried about this. Shortly afterwards, when the commercial aircraft began its takeoff roll, the co-pilot turned the Mishap aircraft towards the runway, starting a normal approach from a pattern altitude of 1,000 feet. So they're basically within the airport environment. They've got the landing in sight. They think it's not going to be a big deal. So during the before landing checklist, the Mishap co-pilot briefed an air-land approach to the ground, land vertically like a helicopter. 2 minutes prior to landing, Mishap co-pilot slowed the aircraft and brought the nacelles up in preparation for landing. So in my mind, if that was the thing, I go back to what I said previously, and that one that was only 5 minutes away, I think was probably the better option, the helipad. If you're not going to land it like an airplane, I don't know. But again, I'm not CV-22. I'm not, I fly helicopters and I fly fixed wing. I don't fly anything that does both. So, but I can also see here, if you've got an airfield where you can get your maintenance guys there, you're thinking, I will do that. And then they can land next to me and there's room and they can work on it and stuff like that. So there's considerations like that too. So within the last 6 seconds of data, cascading failures in short succession were recorded by the KVADR, which is an air data recorder, aviation data recorder. Audible engine surges could be heard in the ambient recording from the cockpit microphone following an auditory master caution. Left-hand prop rotor gearbox oil pressure rapidly dropping when associated left prop rotor gearbox oil pressure low, followed by a voice warning, drive shaft failure, drive shaft, which that sounds very, very bad. Approximately a half mile from the approach end of runway 32, the aircraft was at 785 feet, 106 knots ground speed, with the nacelles at 66 degrees, flap set to auto, and the landing gear retracted. Every step of the before landing checklist was completed except the extension of the gear. At 14:39, which is 2:39, 49 minutes after the first chip burn advisory, it abruptly rolled left and exceeded 90 degrees angle of bank. The last record was as depicted in figure 16 below. The thrust control lever was at full power. Cyclic was at 1.6 inches forward of center and full right. Rudder was 1.3 inches right. Mishap aircraft rolled inverted, continued to roll to the left. The left nacelle caught on fire, and an object separated from the Mishap aircraft fell to the water to the right of the aircraft flight path. Disappeared from radar at 240, impacted the water upright, nose down, rolling left. It's just awful. It's horrific. That's tough. There's no indication of an attempted egress or activation of the individual emergency equipment. Basically, they passed away in the crash. There was no way of surviving that. So they pulled out the chip detectors, all three of them. All could be attributed to abnormal distress sustained in service. No definitive pre-existing defects or conditions were identified with the detectors themselves. So they did identify anomalous conditions. When tested with debris present, the low resistance was measured across the left hand and right hand after the debris was moved. Nominal resistance were measured. The change in resistance after the debris was moved confirmed that the debris sensors were correctly reporting to the monitoring system. So they were working fine. Impact damage caused the fracture. So when they looked at the left-hand prop rotor gearbox, it was sent to the FRC East at Cherry Point. After review, the catastrophic failure of the left-hand PRGB planetary section was most likely initiated by a crack in one of the high-speed pinion gears, fatigue cracking of the associated pinion gear's bearing cage. Additionally, at least one piece of the failed high-speed pinion wedged in the high-speed carrier assembly, grinding against the high-speed sun gear's teeth until finally removed. This mode for removal of the sun gear teeth is consistent with the evidence of grinding and scuffing. Finally, loss of gear meshing and removed the connection. Wow. So that's what the chips were. Mishap pilot was an instructor pilot with 6 years of flying history. He had flown 1,363 hours, graduated from Columbus flying a T6, then a T1, then the CV-22. Interesting. So I guess they didn't send CV-22 pilots to Rucker prior to this. He had flown 12 sorties in 34 hours. This is like the highest I've seen in one of these mishaps lately. The co-pilot was 7 years qualified history as a senior command pilot, 311 hours in the CV-22, so 953 for the other guy, 213 in the PC-12, 867 hours in the U-28. None of them have any rotor wing time. I didn't know that. I thought that this was a rotor wing track. So it's interesting to me that these are basically heavy pilots. So they went in the medical, and the urine and body cavity blood samples for the mishap pilot contained diphenhydramine, an antihistamine medication used for allergies and sleep onset, Tylenol PM sometimes, which is unauthorized for air crew. Consultation with the medical examiner and forensic toxicologist revealed the medication concentration and circulation at the time of the accident is unable to be determined due to postmortem redistribution. But still, they found it. I don't think that's causal, but they don't like it when you take that. Statement of opinion. The biggest thing is they received several chip indications. They never discussed landing to rendezvous with Gundam 2-3. They could have swapped out to the spare aircraft, allowing the maintenance team to troubleshoot the prop rotor gearboxes on the ground. So after the first couple advisories, they were very close, 10 miles and they were suitable. So basically they're saying that had they just said, hey, Gundam 2-3, meet us here. We're having this advisory. It's a nuisance, but we want to keep going. They could have accomplished the mission and gotten it fixed and on the ground before it got worse. But there was no further discussion or collaboration among the crew on other landing options, nor actions by the mishap crew to set conditions for immediate landing or ditching if required, as directed by guidance. Did not consider any other landing locations divert. They didn't indicate a sense of urgency commensurate with the seriousness of the condition. And on final, it failed, resulting in the roll. During the initial rolls when the fire happened, I find that the mishap was caused by a catastrophic failure of the left-hand right prop rotor gearbox and rapidly cascading failure. Additionally, inadequate risk management and ineffective crew resource management. So basically causes catastrophic failure of the prop rotor gearbox, at least one piece of the failed high-speed planetary pinion wedged in the high-speed carrier assembly, grinding against the high-speed sun gear's teeth until they were completely removed. Removal of the gear teeth prevented torque from being applied. The left-hand mass, removal of the high-speed sun gear teeth is consistent with the evidence grinding. Once the left-hand prop rotor gearbox failed and the onset of rapidly cascading malfunctions occurred, it included low lost left-hand oil pressure, ICDS failure, and the overtorque, all occurring in less than 6 seconds. He talks about the pilot flying's decision-making. They should have landed when they had that airport behind them. They went all the way to Yakushima instead of going somewhere closer. But also they looked at program level risk management. So the prop rotor gearbox is complex, critically important system, failure which can be catastrophic. Data on the strength and reliability of this system is important to operations. Data importance notwithstanding, safety assessments and their findings were given insufficient treatment at the program level and have been inadequately communicated to the military services, creating lack of comprehensive awareness of the risks, limiting opportunities to impose risk mitigation measures at the service or unit level. So that's a lot of words to saying it's almost kind of the Boeing thing. Remember when MCAS was a thing and they didn't really know about it? I'm not saying that they didn't know about this, but I think that what they're trying to get at is the emphasis on how important this is and how critical it is if it fails was not there. And so at the program level, so Osprey wide, he's saying that it wasn't a foot stomper. Supervisory risk management, when using an airborne mission commander as primary crew member is permissible. Purpose of dedicating a crew member on this duty is to allow the AMC to focus on the mission coordination. Witness interviews during the AIB revealed that having a single person perform the aircraft commander and AMC duties was discussed during pre-mission planning, which acknowledged to be non-standard practice. The Mishap pilot was permitted to perform AC and AMC functions after determining the mission complexity and environment conditions were acceptable risk, daylight, good weather. Evidence highlights multiple times during the mishap when the pilot prioritized the exercise in coordination with other external participants involved in the exercise overflying the airplane. An AMC thing. I flew mission commander as a single seat fighter pilot, so I think it's very doable. However, I mean, it's like the airline world, right? You got a pilot flying and a pilot monitoring. Pilot monitoring talks to all the outside agencies, talks to the radio, talks to all that stuff. So I can see in a crew aircraft where that's right. It's also to me unusual to have -2 be the mission commander, although not impossible. It's just you'd think that the flight lead would be the mission commander for the whole thing, because leading from -2 is kind of weird. This is a crew thing, but I can see their point. I don't think that this is causal, other than just like in any other crew scenario, you need one person that's focused on flying the airplane and one person that's focused on the outside stuff. And then when something goes wrong, you both come back inside the airplane. Real-time risk management. Yeah, I mean, as soon as they had to land, as soon as practical condition, they were still very close to mainland Japan and several divert airfields. They made the decision to continue with the mission with very little discussion. So they needed to bring everybody in the loop. The flight engineer was the one saying, hey, boss, this is still something legit. They adequately prioritized continuing the mission over considerations. Departing Iwakuni, they had altered their flight route by turning westward from their brief route to facilitate the air-to-air refueling timing. This change of plans put them further west and made available different divert options that may not have been practical on the original route of flight. Subsequently, they received the chip caution in the cockpit and had land as soon as possible condition. They chose a divert option that was not the closest. So remember, as soon as possible, put it on the ground right now. The mishap pilot allowed the co-pilot to fly at 8,000 feet instead of descending below the scattered cloud deck in a prudent manner, so they might see other divert options. Descending would have also placed the mishap aircraft in a position to effect an immediate landing or controlled ditching. Yeah. After diverting, they only discussed strong winds aloft and did not replan for much calmer surface winds, which would have made a straight-in approach to the airport a consideration. And once in the vicinity, rather than mitigating further risk by declaring emergency and doing the straight-in, they allowed the co-pilot to fly the box pattern, set up for an approach, and then they entered the holding pattern for civilian. You're an emergency, you're a priority. But they had not talked to airfield ops. They had not announced they were a thing. Yakushima Airport ATC, they knew they had an emergency, but that was 14 minutes after the chip's caution. So this substantially contributed. Ineffective crew resource management. Mishap co-pilot made multiple passive attempts to prompt the mishap pilot to reconsider his response posture to the chip burn advisories, but never made an assertive statement about his uneasiness with evolving issues. Flight engineer and the tail guy remained inappropriately focused on the intelligence broadcast receiver instead of backing up, although the flight engineer did make a couple comments that were helpful. Dynamic, unplanned sequence of events required the crew to work as a team, and they didn't. This is a tough one to read, right? We get the benefit of perfect 2020 hindsight when we're doing these. Of course, now, knowing that the outcome was going to be that the prop rotor gearbox was going to completely fail, it's very easy to go back and go, well, yeah, they should have diverted as soon as they got the first one. But if you look at it through the lens of what did they see at the time, you can see what they were thinking. Although it wasn't correct, you can understand where they were coming from, right? When you're in a mission first mindset and you've got pressure on an exercise and the seriousness of this issue has not been emphasized fleet wide, you don't really, it's the first time. You're not really thinking that. And then you get a bunch of these warnings, these advisories, and you're like, is that a nuisance or is that the real thing? I can easily see you going, well, okay, let's just get this thing on the ground. Because I've had those emergencies. We've all had those emergencies where it's like, it's a nuisance light. You get, for a couple minutes, you think it's real serious. And then you're like, it's a nuisance. And you land and they're like, oh, we just need to reset this breaker or something like that. That being said, what can we learn from this? Because there's stuff to learn from this. Number one, I think they kind of waited till the end to bring up a good point. The co-pilot had suggested that they take that more seriously a few times, but was being passive about it. As a pilot, as a co-pilot, first officer, anybody, wingman, it is your job to speak up. That's the whole Tenerife thing, right? That happened because the co-pilot, the captain's like, shut up, co-pilot, we're not listening to you. And we don't speak up as a crew. Everyone has an equal voice when it comes to being in a crew and it comes to safety. So in this case, it is on the co-pilot who's experienced, not as experienced as the pilot flying, as the aircraft commander, but still experienced, to say, hey, look, you know what? There is no mission today. We need to get down on the ground. Combat, 100%. That's a different world. You're going to take some risks that you probably wouldn't take in training. An international joint, cluster exercise, who cares? Just the real answer would have been divert, scrub the mission, whatever. It's not even an upgrade ride. It's just a stupid exercise. Who cares if the Bobs get their next star? Worry about saving lives. I think it always boils down to training and what information they had going out to the aircraft, and then the environment. What were they doing in their sims, in their emergency procedure sims? What was the emphasis item? I'm sure it's an emphasis item now, but what was the emphasis item back then? Because that frames how you react to stuff in the airplane. You're only as good as your training, and you're only as good as your flight experience. So if you're not flying much, not flying within 7 days, okay, but he just still had a lot of hours in the last 30 or 60 or 90. If we're not flying enough and we're not training to the worst possible scenario, when the worst possible scenario happens, sometimes we don't take it as seriously as we need to. So if anything, it always boils down to that. But I can 100% understand the target fixation of, I'm a mission commander and my head is outside the cockpit because I need to succeed as a mission commander and make this mission right. So it's very tough. And my thoughts are with the family, because obviously families, 8 American aviators, service members lost their lives in this. And it's very tragic. And it's tragic because it could have been avoided, but sometimes the Swiss cheese just lines up. So let me know in the comments what you think. I know a lot of people are in the Osprey community, so let me know kind of what the thought is. Where am I wrong? Where am I right? Because I'm curious and learning. Like I said, I've got helicopter background and I've got fixed wing background, but I've never combined them. And it's interesting to me that these pilots in their background had no helicopter time, which to me you would want doing stuff that hovers. But I guess Harrier, you don't fly helicopters if you fly the Harrier. So I don't know, but I don't think that's causal. I'm just curious. But anyway, hope you guys got something out of this episode. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.